Yo, Adrian, we did it. We did it. Your boy BC, the Brian Campbell, coming at your morning combat. I'm a little bit of a bonus clip for you right here, right now. When I say we did it, of course, echoing the famous line that the character Rocky Balboa closed with at the end of 1979 sequel Rocky 2. I am, of course, talking about my own personal 9 film father son journey. You've heard me hyping it up on Morning Combat, the entire Rocky Creed collection with myself and my twin 15-year-old son. So I thought, hey, why don't I fill this MK universe with a little side dish right here, ranking in order the best films from worst to best across the board. A quick reminder, you can like and subscribe to what we do here on Morning Combat. I'm Brian Campbell, just one half, alongside Luke Thomas of this award-winning duo every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, live here on YouTube, 11 a.m. Eastern time. But we know the impact, especially if you're washed in my age, of what these films created by the great Sylvester Stallone have meant to our journeys through life and our growth as men and women too, and the inspirational turns. It still gives you goosebumps today to go back and watch the original. And it's been an incredible journey from an Oscar award-winning film to start to some fantastic action 80s cheese all the way through the new edition behind Michael B. Jordan and the trio of Creed movies. Of course, the third one which just came out. So here's what happened. I grew up on this stuff. I lived this stuff. I was 4 years old in 1982 when Rocky 3 came out, but when that came on HBO on cable, a little more than a year later, it spawned a bunch of the great loves of my life when my dad sat me down to watch Rocky 3, from Mr. T's appearance, which spun off into the A-Team, which became my favorite TV show. Of course, from Thunder Lips, Hulk Hogan's appearance in Rocky 3, which was an easy transition for me to what was going on at MTV at the time, ahead of the build to WrestleMania 1 and the rock and wrestling connection there between the WWF and MTV. And of course, my love of boxing. It started with the Rocky movies. There's no question about it. I saw Rocky 4 in the theater in 1985, was so damn fired up, and have seen every single one since. So I sat down with my 15-year-old twin sons. They hadn't seen any of them. They didn't know a thing about this. And we did it start to finish just yesterday, watching Creed 3 in IMAX, and then living in a little bit more than a week, the entire 9 film journey. So here's from my standpoint. Am I a credible, great film critic? Not necessarily. I like to believe I am in a music sense, right? Or in a combat sports sense. But I know what I like, and I do know what's good. So this isn't the rewatchable Rocky Creed rundown where I'm like, look, you may not love Rocky 4 as a film, but if any Rocky is going to be on the TV and it happens to be 4, you're stopping what you're doing. You're sitting down and you're reliving the magic. This is actually a ranking of the films in order, on quality, on everything that goes with that. 9 films, Rocky and Creed. We start from worst to best, and we begin right now. Number 9, the worst film in the entire extended Rocky franchise. You guessed it, 1990s Rocky 5. I saw it in the theater. I was very disappointed then, and upon rewatch last week for the first time in, geez, at least 20 years, it was worse than I remembered. So here's the story on this film. I like the story. So John Avildsen was the director of Rocky 1. He won the the Oscar. He got busy in the 80s. He did the Karate Kid trilogy. So he did a few other things. He didn't come back again until this time, Rocky 5. So it was supposed to be this grand reunion of Sylvester Stallone, who had written all 5 Rockies up to this point, and Avildsen, who can do that underdog story as good as anybody in history. And the actual story of Rocky 5, of the down on the luck Balboa suddenly, because Paulie, the brother-in-law of Rocky, made some bad investments, signed over the financial rights, and the family went from riches in the mansion that they lived in Rocky 3 and 4 to rags back in the original Philadelphia townhome that Paulie and Adrian lived in the first Rocky film. Story-wise, I liked it. You get to see Rocky as a dad dealing with the relationship with his son. You get to see Rocky welcoming in another young fighter from the streets in Tommy Gunn, played admirably, by the way, in an acting debut by former heavyweight title holder Tommy Morrison. But it fell apart quick. and the real life acting of Sylvester Stallone's actual son as his son in this movie was certainly a major eyesore in the way we remember it. But I think even more, there was a lot of things that were wrong here. In true to most Rocky movies, Rocky 5 ends where Rocky 4 finished. It's literally the night of. They pick up with Rocky in the locker room in Moscow, and it just begins to be a comedy of errors, of a lack of that connectivity, right? Not only are we switching directors here, which can happen, but you can still do it right. But it's 5 years later, time wise, everyone's looking a lot older, and they're picking up right where they left off the night before there. And, you know, from a new mansion unexplained to Rocky and Adrian's son growing between the two movies of like 7 years in age, there was a lot not to like. And I think even worse, it was the execution overall. The acting was not good. The fact that the majority of the film played up the idea, rightfully so, on the arc of a boxer, right? That Rocky dealing with legitimate head trauma from a long career, and particularly the wars, twice with Apollo Creed and once with Ivan Drago at the end of Rocky 4 in Moscow, which, you know, comedically would have, it's hard to say comedically when you're talking about death, but would have killed anybody with the amount of clean punches he took. They pick up where they pick up with that, and it's a real life storyline to the idea of a real boxer. But how does the movie close? Rocky getting to a street fight with active heavyweight Tommy Morrison, and spoiler alert, winning it. So, you know, taking a lot of damage to do so. So it's like, you know, Rocky gets carried off by the Philadelphia faithful, because that's what we do in Rocky movies. But him beating Morrison and Tommy Gunn in that street fight, it just didn't make any sense. It just really didn't. I hated to see the reunion of Avildsen there, and the idea that this would take the franchise into a whole new direction, similar to what Rocky 3 did, similar to what Creed 1 did. But it wouldn't be the case. This left a bad stain on the entire franchise. And I remember, you know, my dad playfully making fun of Rocky in the aftermath of watching this in the theater, of him specifically that scene in the bar that led to the fight in the street alley, where it was like, you know, oh, you knock Paulie down? Won't you try knocking me down? Yeah, I mean, that's all I remember ultimately from that film. But, you know, there's a Frank Stallone cameo. You always get the Ozzy Canseco brother moment in there, and there's a few other hey, Al Bernstein of Showtime and then ESPN is in that and has a pretty cool role as a you know, one of the boxing reporters who's throwing shots at Rocky, but and throwing shots at Union Kane, his opponent in the man groomed to be his opponent in the film. Yeah, that movie sucks. We should move on, unfortunately, because I thought over time that I had this nostalgic fear. Well, you know, maybe the movie wasn't acted great, but man, that story was pretty good. No, the story sucked too. All right, let's keep it going. Number 8 on the Rocky movie extended universe countdown. I hate to put this here. Second worst of them all. And look, your countdowns may wildly vary based on exactly the criteria you're looking for. For example, my kids watched all these movies with me. They love the Creed ones way better than the slower Rocky ones. They love some of the crappier Rocky ones way better than the critically acclaimed Rocky ones. But Creed 2 from 2018 was a monster disappointment for me. Almost like my Rocky 5 argument. You've got the argument here that, well, it was a good story on paper. And like, who wouldn't, as a fan of boxing, as a fan of the Rocky lineage, and the idea that the Creed series just sort of relaunched it, right, to a whole new generation, but keeping the continuity of the old characters, who would not have loved a scenario in which Adonis Creed, Apollo Creed's, you know, sort of bastardized son that he had never met, but of course his widow took Adonis in, Donnie Johnson, and turned him into a legitimate fighter with you know, Rocky Balboa behind the scenes there. Who would not have loved the idea of Apollo's kid with Rocky in the corner fighting Ivan Drago's kid with Drago in the corner and dealing with the same things that Drago's character dealt with at the end of Rocky 4, the idea that this Russian government created him and then turned on him right when he looked like he was falling apart in that epic exhibition match on Christmas Day against Rocky in Moscow. Everything on paper seemed to look great here, except for this. We got to shout out Ryan Coogler, the young director who sensationally brought this franchise back to life with Creed 1. They wanted him for Creed 2. He was a little bit busy with Black Panther, and he ended up becoming the executive producer of this. But Stallone stepped in, at first to replace him as director, and that didn't really work out. Ultimately, Stallone gets a co-writing credit here with Jewel Taylor, but Stephen Caple Jr. took over as director. And even though there's these cool moments, my kids loved Creed 2, the way it was shot, the jacked young Drago and all this. And there's sort of these echoes of Rocky 3 in a way where, of course, in Rocky 3, Balboa falls to Clubber Lang as things in his life are falling apart, but then rebounds and finds the confidence to overcome the fear and takes out the bigger monster. Similar echoing storylines here, although in this case, Adonis Creed wins by disqualification in their first meeting, but gets dominated and comes back and gets it. It should have been great, but there's a lack of heart in that movie. And I don't know if it's to blame the constant switch in directors and the buildup, but it was almost as if they went as formulaic as possible with, okay, everybody wants to see if Drago ever comes back. Well, let's have his son. Oh, let's have this. Let's have it happen. Everything that happened in this movie felt very sped up. It felt like, okay, this is the next move. Let's jump to it without sort of that emotional connectivity and that commitment to the character development that you've come to know. And I mean, my kids said it best, Rocky 1 and 2, and even Rocky Balboa in 2006. So slow, Dad. Why is it so slow? I want to see action. I want Rocky 4 montage action. I mean, at times I do too. But what was great about those films was that slow development of character, all those dramatic scenes of husband and wife arguing and Rocky as a fighter looking deep within himself and facing his demons. I feel like all of that was gone. That stuff was there in Creed 1. That stuff was there in Creed 3. Creed 2 was something that you had all the ingredients there on the table, but you just didn't cook them in the right order for the amount of time. You didn't have that savvy. You didn't have that, that pepper on the stick. You didn't have that, what do we call him, that guy? Salt Bay. We didn't Salt Bay that shit. Okay. On Creed 2. It's disappointing. It's hard hitting, it's action, but a lot of it just feels forced and jumped. And we go from here to here. Well, what about that? What about that? And I think the true echoing criticisms from this is that what did Creed 1 establish so nicely? A pivot, a new era, a new fighter, a new look, a new generation in this character, Adonis Creed, played by Michael B. Jordan, played admirably by Michael B. Jordan. But Creed 2, maybe it's the same criticism people have had in some ways of Star Wars Episode 7, definitely, and maybe even 8, of too much fan service. There's much too much Rocky and Drago fan service, even for somebody like me who lives for that stuff this time around, that it wasn't enough about the development of the character and who really mattered in that movie. And that was Adonis Creed, who had made that transition from unlikely sort of challenger in the first Creed movie, similar to what Balboa did in the first Rocky movie, right? But just made that transition into legitimate fighter and heavyweight champion just a bit too quickly, easily, and unexplained. And you're splitting hairs here and debating these great movies and what separates them. But I think that's ultimately a big part of it at the end. Let's go to number 7 on my countdown. Third worst here. It's a movie I've been back and forth on. 1979's Rocky 2. So like a lot of these Rocky movies, it picks up directly where the first movie left off. Like literally the scene ends and it starts again, right? Even though it was filmed 3 years later. And Avildsen's gone, but this is the first of Sylvester Stallone. First of all, he did a major power play to the film company and everybody, saying essentially, if you don't let me direct this after Avildsen was unable to join, that Rocky was going to quit the project altogether. Well, look, Rocky 1 was such a monster surprise hit, an Oscar award winner, that you knew they'd go all in. They would do whatever they had to do for a big money sequel. And ultimately, Stallone, who was director, writer, and star, which, same thing with Michael B. Jordan, by the way, in Creed 3, director and star. Not easy to do. Not easy to do here for Stallone. Did they pull it off? It's like yes and no. I'm telling you, it's my third worst in the franchise. As a kid, I loved Rocky 2. Loved it. I felt that, as Rocky 1 can be slow to kids who don't understand the idea of the impact of what that film represents, Rocky 2 had a lot going on in Rocky's life. You got the fallout of what happened in the first movie in the hospital opposite Creed. You've got marriage, fatherhood, buying a house, a lot of these things that I think showed, rightfully so, at least in the story that Stallone wrote, of even though Balboa's character had this breakthrough moment at the end of Rocky 1. Because what's the beauty of Rocky 1? It's that he didn't win that fight against Creed, but that ultimately that wasn't his goal. His goal was just to prove to himself once and for all that he wasn't a piece of shit, that he was somebody. I thought too, with this to some degree, did a decent job of saying, look, he's got this moment where he's somebody and he tries to walk away from the sport. One of many times that Balboa's character would try to do that. And he just figures out, with a pregnant wife, with no money coming in, with can't get a job because he doesn't have an education, he's not smart. Fighting is the only thing he knows how. So you certainly get, you get the beginning of what Bill Simmons used to call wet blanket Adrian Balboa, but you get, those true real life key moments that I'm sure every fighter must go through. The idea of, what if I taken too much damage? This sport's so dangerous. Why do I want to go back there and do again? What am I trying to prove? All that. And why did I love this movie so much as a kid? Because the final scene, the fight, the rematch is especially down the stretch. I mean, it's incredible. You get your chill bump Rocky montage to build to the fight. You get this epic fight, and you have one of the craziest endings in sports history in terms of sports movies, of the double knockdown there in the final round, and Rocky beating the clock and getting up, and yo, Adrian, I did it. Big moments there. Why don't I love this though in hindsight more? Why don't I keep this in my top 3 or 4 like a lot of people do? Because it's really hard. It's really hard to make a sequel that improves on the first movie or is as good. I mean, you can, I can say Godfather 2 on one hand, and I can say almost every other attempt at a sequel. And even though I like the story and I liked a lot of the execution, I don't know if I loved here. It felt just a little bit too forced, meaning there's a certain underlying reason why Rocky 1 was so good and hit so hard. That long form character development, right? And these moments where Stallone, who's unheard of, yet writes the script, forces the studio to cast him as the lead, and kind of over delivers on the grit and the despair. When they redid that the second time around, including, Adrian might not make it and Rocky's at the hospital every day crying over her body, in the coma, there was something very forced and not as forced as Creed 2 per se, but there's something very forced and not personal. It looked like he was acting, where I think in what a part of the magic of Rocky 1 and an unknown actor leading this, little engine that could to Best Picture, by the way, against like Network and other, monster movies in 1976, was that in the second one, it felt a little bit like he was acting. But there's enough of the feels of the first movie that I think a lot of people sort of link it as one of the good ones without really fine tooth combing it. And what I mean by that, it's the same thing if you're in the Star Wars canon, which was, coming up at the same time of what ultimately Return of the Jedi, the third Star Wars film, was. I also, like Rocky 2, looking back, can't figure out, is that a great movie and just not as good as the first two? Or is it a step down? I think ultimately it's both. And if you look at the, Return of the Jedi, you've got these great moments early and late that are as good as any other moments in the Star Wars history. The Jabba scene in Tatooine and the ultimate, Skywalker rescue to get Han and Leia and get away from there. And of course, the ending of the movie and Darth Vader's choice of, dominance, control of the world, or saving my son, which is, ultimate moment. But that in between with the Ewoks and some of that other bullshit, I don't love it. I didn't love it. You loved it as a kid. You look back now, you don't love it. It didn't hold up across the board. That's what Rocky 2 is to me. It feels a lot like the first one. You've got all the same cast coming back. In fact, oddly enough, Burt Young, who is really, you want to know who's the MVP of the Rocky series? Well, certainly Stallone, right? But who's the unheralded? Who's the dark horse there that kept it all together? It's the humor of Paulie, right? First, well, it didn't start as humor, right? It started in Rocky 1 as sort of drunken, diabolical behavior. But it was, oddly enough, he got in such great shape for the second one that he's actually, it's the only version of Paulie in the entire series where, like, he's not only he's ahead of his own game. He's living his best life. He's finally gotten Rocco to agree to get him a job there with the local tough guy organized crime circuit, mafia circuit, and he's dressed in pinstripe suits and he's almost given Rocky life advice suddenly when Balboa is down in his luck. I liked a lot of that. But overall, it feels a lot like the first one and how great that was. And, I mentioned the comparison to Jedi having those couple great moments. Rocky 2 has a couple great moments. The ending is still enough to make you kind of, you can't help but smile at the end of it when Rocky gets up and yells into the mic and Adrian's at home crying, watching. And it's sort of the final culmination of what made their love affair, which I know in hindsight, you can kind of look back as, I don't know about cringe, but at times corny, at times whatever. I mean, they're kind of two loner weirdos who come together, but there is a beautiful part of that. And I think that was sort of the culmination of that in that moment. And Rocky 2, as she's pregnant watching from home, and Rocky uses that time once again to look in the microphone and shout out his lady. But Rocky 2, I think, has a lot of good and bad, and it could show up anywhere in this countdown. For me, it's number 7. Let's go to number 6. Another one that I've seen bounced around a lot of people's rankings and how they look at it. But overall, is it a good movie? Is it a bad movie? Rocky Balboa from 2006 is a very good movie. It's the make good. It's is this Rocky 6 in a way? But in another way, it's almost as if Stallone, who, let's not forget, the first 5 movies come in a stretch from 1976 to 1990, right? Broken apart. Then you don't have another Rocky film until 2006, 16 years later. So in some ways, it's an idea to take the series home, to fix the lingering hangover from Rocky 5, and in a lot of ways to almost echo a lot of the same true meanings and things we took away inspiration from Rocky 1, just at a more advanced stage in Balboa's character's life. Some people think this is like the second or third best Rocky of all time, and there were times that I believed that too. It was a revelation when I saw it. It was like, oh shit. I mean, because look, let's be honest. Rocky 5 left us with such a bad taste in our mouths. There's already a lot of people, including like pure movie fans, who think Rocky 3 and 4 was trash and not this pinnacle of what 80s cheesy, amazing American propaganda action flicks can be. Rocky Balboa was like heartfelt again. So it was, a kick in the gut. Now, of course, my kids being 15, they're like, oh, Dad, that's the one's almost as slow as the first Rocky. So they strongly dislike this one. I love, for the most part, Rocky Balboa. Why is it only 6 on my list, though? I feel like the long build up to the eventual fight at the end, and which was, it was interesting the way that it was cool, right? It was the idea of a computer simulation being played out on ESPN TV, and they had Brian Kenny there. They had a bunch of the, personalities of that moment there, Max Kellerman, all that. And it was the idea of, could the old Balboa, who the fans still love, who's been retired, beat the current champion who's getting trash thrown at him? Mason the Line Dixon, played, admirably by Antonio Tarver. Good enough by Antonio Tarver. Pretty decent, especially the speaking roles, like pretty decent. Short of the fight, even though the whole buildup there is long and arduous, and to my kids too long, it's beautifully, commandingly performed by Stallone, who, let's not forget, for the 5th straight Rocky film here, if this is Rocky 6, 2006 is Rocky Balboa, he's the director, writer, and star. Not easy to do. Again, I think, we can underrate Stallone historically, right? For because he's tied to so many characters that are looked at as commercial gets. And obviously he milked the shit out of this Rocky series, even to the point now with Creed 3 that he's not even involved, and he's at odds with the producers who own the rights to it over the direction of it. But he had a tour de force performance here of a widowed ex-fighter, not necessarily still down on his luck like he was in Rocky 5, had rebuilt his life, owns a restaurant, Adrian's, got the memorabilia on the wall, does a little song and dance to each people that come in and want to shake his hand and have him tell stories about the past. But it's this whole idea of navigating what's left to live for. What motivates me? Why am I here? I can't get over the grieving of my ex-wife, mixed with I don't have a relationship with my son. That stuff was great. I mean, you got to love Stallone to truly love this part and this performance and this aspect of it. And obviously you have to love the Rocky films, but I mean, he nailed it. He nailed it. Even when, there's some actors and actresses in this who certainly aren't, they brought back some of the old crew, right? Like Paulie's back, and he played a very comedic older version of himself. Duke, Tony, the trainer, Creed's old trainer that helps out, Rocky and Rocky 4 is there too. And there's enough of the past that they bring back. I mean, look, the Spider Rico come back there. Who would have saw that coming? Was fun. But even some of these bit roles, they're not necessarily played by household name actors, but it just worked. And it worked because Stallone had all the control and he poured his heart into it. And there had been enough time away from the franchise, and you could see that there were things he wanted to fix from Rocky 5 that just didn't work out. The only thing I don't love at the end of the day, even though it's not the fight sequence at the end, the fight against Tarver, against Mason the Line Dixon, and the idea that Rocky in his late 50s, maybe even 60, could get a license and then get into shape for one more fight, right? Because they did properly set up that this fighter, Mason Dixon, was being criticized for fighting bums in this downward period of the heavyweight division, which did mirror and echo what was really going on in boxing at the time with the Klitschko brothers on top, but Lennox Lewis gone, Tyson gone, all the story there. It's not that that stuff doesn't hold up when you rewatch it. It's not that that's a stain on it. In fact, that was the first time I think that they really presented the boxing matches in the movie as if they were real life boxing match. And you had the HBO, which was the premier production crew at the time. You had the HBO announced team and graphics on the screen, and it felt like you're watching a real HBO fight. And you had the buildup of the ESPN Sports Center in the movie, and it's all great. But it's almost as if, and it's going to sound stupid to say this for a Rocky movie, but it's almost as if that last fight wasn't necessary, because I think Stallone's character here, Balboa, just in realizing that, there's something left in the basement, right? That it's the whole recurring theme. Like, everyone's trying to talk him out of it. And he's like, I don't know what else to do. I'm a fighter. This is what I do. The whole idea of like a lot of ex-athletes or anyone in life, when you retire and you go away from the career that sort of defined you, like, who am I? Do I have something left to give to anybody? They established so well that Balboa, the character, did have a lot to give to anybody, from mentoring the son of the girl that he was trying to date, which you love the synergy because that's the same character that told him off, or in earlier Rocky movies when he tried to get her off the street corner. All that synergy worked, right? And it's gritty. For 2006, it's kind of a gritty movie of that local Philly stuff. But when you got to that fight, even though the presentation was decent, I mean, is 59-year-old or 60-year-old Rocky Balboa really going to go 10 rounds with the heavyweight champion of the world in his prime? Could I see, if they had redone this, especially some of the exhibitions that we see now in real boxing for guys coming back, Mike Tyson, Roy Jones, let's say they had redone that, and that was a 4-round exhibition. And you're like, this really is about this champion, Mason Dixon, feeling so much pressure from his promoters to get a big payday because there's nobody to fight. Go fight this guy that everybody thinks you can never live up to. Could that be a 4-round fight of which, Balboa's character predictably gets beat up in the first round and then comes back in the second and knocks him down and has this big rally? Yeah, you got to stretch the levels of disbelief, but I guess it's the same thing of, remember when Mike Tyson came back a few years ago at 53 and was in incredible shape and had that 8-round exhibition with Roy Jones? Could that version of Mike Tyson gone in there for 4 rounds against a heavyweight of today and maybe surprisingly, despite the low odds, had a moment? Possible, right? Power's the last thing to go. I just think that could have been handled better. I get the synergy there in the way that fight ended with Balboa losing a close decision, and he doesn't even stay to hear the scores. He's walking through the crowd there, giving high fives, hugging everybody. I get that that's symbolic of what the first movie meant, where again, it wasn't about Rocky winning the title or beating Creed. He did neither. It was about proving to himself and no one else that he's worth something, that, his life isn't in vain. Why do the Rocky movies connect with everybody? Because of that right there. That's all of us. Okay. Not just Americans. It's all of us, it's all of us who feel average a lot of the days, yet realize at some point in our adult lives that maybe we were meant for more. Maybe there is something else out there. I get that. I know you're saying, BC, you're really going to critique, that this was a 10-round fight, not a 4-round fight. Did you not watch Rocky 4 that I'm sure you're going to talk nice things about, even though there wasn't one blocked punch the entire fight? All right. Touche. You got me there. I almost feel like that movie was such an overachiever for 45 minutes to an hour. And then it kind of just ended and it was okay. But I think it could have been great. And I think there are some people that certainly love and see that greatness that came out of there. And that's why sometimes you see that as the second or third or fourth favorite on people's list of what's truly the best movies in this series. For me, it's the 6th best. Let's go to number 5. It's the one I just saw. It's 2023's Creed 3. Let me just say this. When that trailer came out and I went to 4. I grew up going to the movies like everybody else, a million times, any average American. My dad loved the movies. We went all the time. I didn't really go as an adult, unless it was like every 2 years, something huge came out, right? Like, like Star Wars episode 7 or something like that. You're like, okay, I got to get back to the theater. I got to see this. Maybe it's the evolution of streaming in our home theaters and all that, I just didn't feel the need. I have recaptured the love of going back to the theater in recent years. And I saw that Creed 3 trailer 4 different times in the past, 6 months in the theaters, and blew me away each time. it let you know that something special is here, especially if you didn't like Creed 2 like I didn't. It let you know that there's a new look and a new direction to where this is going. Why? In some degrees, because Michael B. Jordan, the star playing Adonis Creed, directed this one. And to another degree, Ryan Coogler, who was, the ace in the hole and Creed 1 being so great, did come back as a writer, along with Keegan Coogler and Zach Balin. The three of them end up getting the screenplay writing credits. But Creed 3 has a lot of the elements of what made Rocky 3 such a revelation and a newfound hope in the series of, the new badass villain that truly challenges the main, character to dig at a level deep within himself that he didn't know was possible. It's really good. And presentation wise, it's great. I have it as the 5th best movie in this series. My kids think it's the best. They're young, but it presentation wise, I mean, we just saw it in IMAX. It's incredible. It's, obviously spoiler alerts across the board here, but, having that final fight in Dodger Stadium, having the DAZN announce crew at times with Todd Grisham and Chris Mannix and Jessica McCaskill. And then at times you got the Showtime pay-per-view. I worked for Showtime Box. I didn't even know they were part of that. You got Mauro Ranallo, you got Al Bernstein, Jimmy Lennon Jr. there. It made it feel big and real when they tied in the real life boxing moments. And you get echoes of movies past. Rocky 3, you get echoes, right? Not just of this gnarly opponent that comes out of nowhere that really challenges, but you lose Mickey in that movie. In this one, you lose Felicia Rashad, Mrs. Cosby, who 3 really good performances here as the widow of Apollo Creed, and that whole story of how she took in this, this bastardized son with no direction and no family. In fact, it was her late husband's love child, and she took her, and she's great in this. Michael B. Jordan is fan-friggin-tastic in this. And the only thing better than Michael B. Jordan in this one is his antagonist, is his villain. I didn't write this guy's name down. I know I've seen him in other things and he's fantastic. He plays Dame. He plays Dame Anderson in the movie, Damien. Can we shout out Jonathan Majors here? He wins the trailer that got a lot of us into this. He got into insane shape. I liked his movements here in the boxing parts of this. I love the way he played a villain, but it's a villain who thinks he's justified in the way that he's almost maniacally trying to get back at Adonis Creed's character, because Major's character here, Dame Anderson, took the rap when they were younger, when he was a top-rated amateur, and, goes to jail for almost 2 decades, but keeps this chip on his shoulder. And, there's some diabolical elements to this, almost the Tanya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan thing of paying somebody to break young Drago's hand to call off that fight. I mean, you get Jose Benavidez Jr., by the way, the former boxing welterweight title challenger, brother of David Benavidez, who was, of course, on Showtime pay-per-view this weekend in the biggest fight of his career. He's playing a heavyweight, but he pulled it off, that character, with his mom as his manager in the corner. This was a badass movie. And it challenged the family dynamics. The actress that played the deaf daughter of Michael B. Jordan, and Tessa Thompson, who plays his wife Bianca, brilliant stuff. You felt the connection there of father, son, and daughter, and the sign language that they're communicating, and the whole idea of, I thought I was done, but they're going to pull me back in one more time because this representation of my past is coming back to haunt me in ways that I think the only way to fix this and solve this is to go right through it. You have that great moment. For as much as Adrian Balboa throughout the series was trying more almost to get in the way of Rocky's boxing dominance in climbing these mountains because of fear for her son's, brain, basically, the moment where Bianca, the wife of Adonis Creed, is basically like, you got to do it, then go do it. I mean, that's, that begins the chill bump type of moment there. That's an incredible moment. Ultimately, what makes this so high on my list, you can argue low. I've got it as the 5th best. I'm an old school homer, but could this be in your top 3? Very, very much so. Is because I think the personal story struggle here for Adonis Creed was great, because it's very life adaptable, as was Rocky Balboa's inspirational, story in Rocky 1 of I need to prove to everyone that that there's a reason I'm on this earth, that I was something. Creed's got his own thing, but it's a little bit different. It's that there's going to be these things from our past that if we don't deal with them, they're going to haunt us. And, if you don't deal with with the things of your past, the haunting, the, you'll never be able to break through and get ahead. And, they hammer that message home. That one, you can connect with that while you're watching it. It's a universal message. So the presentation could not have been more badass. You get the cameos from, young Drago, from pretty Ricky Conlon, played by former light heavyweight title holder Tony Bellew. You get a lot of good moments in there, and God, is Michael B. Jordan Jack. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Directorially, I thought he nailed it. I was a little nervous, of course, in that main event fight when they're in Dodger Stadium and suddenly, the fans disappear and the jail cell appears in the ring, and you're like, what is going on here? Some type of, mind F that's going on here. No, that symbolically, I think, really represented that. And, to see is it unlikely, is it implausible that somebody could be a top rated amateur here in the character played by Majors, Dame Anderson, and go away and then come back and in his pro debut get a heavyweight title shot? Well, it has happened before when Pete Rademacher, the Olympic gold medalist for the U.S., made his pro debut against Floyd Patterson fighting for the title. So I guess there's some elements of a possibility there, but I like how they played that. The idea of, like, they almost mentioned in Creed 3, like, this isn't Rocky 1. You can't, you're not just going to give a nobody a chance, especially a nobody who's never fought. But the circumstances opened the door for that. And, do I have to suspend levels of disbelief that maybe I was unwilling to do at the end of the fight in Rocky Balboa for this one? To some degrees I did, but it's almost not comparable to the production level of what you see in Creed 3 compared to when you go back and rewatch those Rocky films. So altogether, I think it was great. Very good. It was very good. It was very good. And I think it did open the door for a new avenue of further movies here. I'd love to see Balboa's character with Stallone come back in some form. A lot of us would. And if you don't know that story, Stallone was going to come in on this third movie, right? And apparently he sold the rights to the the IP, the character, the characters, the film, back to the original producers back after the first one when he needed money, and he didn't know this Rocky franchise was going to be what it is. But Stallone had serious disagreements with the sort of some of the dark nature of the script here and the places that this movie went. And I thought ultimately it was a modern adaptation that was needed to some of these more edgier, gnarlier ways of looking at it. So Stallone didn't love it because, the first 6 Rockies are always sort of built on adversity, but then, sort of instant comeback and climbing of the mountain. But I hope they can figure that out, because you'd love to see a role there for old Rocco if possible. But you're already seeing the daughter of Bianca and Adonis Creed's character closing the film in the ring, punching like her dad. I mean, there's some elements there that I think this franchise has a bright future ahead of it, and Creed 3 had to be good to regain that after somewhat of a stinker of what Creed 2 ultimately was. But continuing down the countdown, now we go into the top 4. Always a controversial pick here, 1985's Rocky 4. I could make an argument that's the best film of the entire series, although you're saying, BC, that's crazy. How can this be the best film when there's an Oscar winner in here? I mean, it's so damn cheesy and ridiculous, and the propaganda message of Rocky saving the Cold War at the end, it's almost like, even though it's coming, even though you've watched this movie a million times, it still catches you off guard for how absurd it is and ridiculous. If I could change, you could change, and we all can change. Yet in that genre of like ridiculous American 80s action movies, it's a 10 out of a 10. And you can't argue that. It's why 3 and 4 were most responsible with saving this franchise and it's still being around today and being relevant, because I think Stallone hit a certain point where he saw the shifting gears. He saw that, it's not going to be easy to keep making sequels of like long drawn out dramatic type of personal stories and movements. You're going to have adapt to the times, and the times in the 80s were quick moving montage scenes. Where does Rocky 4 excel? The soundtrack is insanely great, taking some of the songs of old and repurposing them. The new ones of, Hearts on Fire, Two Worlds Collide, Rival Nations. I mean, the song, if you're my age and you grew up in the 90s, just undoubtedly you had a Walkman with the Rocky 4 soundtrack on either tape or CD, Discman, and that was your workout playlist. I mean, there's just no doubt about it, right? You mix that with the best training montages in the history, there's no easy way out. Remember that song when Rocky's driving in a sports car, trying to come to terms with the death of Apollo and the fact that he just, without even thinking, said, yes, I will fight Drago to avenge his loss. And I'll do it for free, by the way, with the title not on the line, and travel to Moscow and train in ridiculous old school barbaric ways. I mean, if you want, it's weird. It's like, if you tell me you hate Rocky 4, then that means you might be a good movie fan, but you're not an action movie fan, because this is like borderline perfection. It really is. Stallone writes, directs, stars in it, as we talked about there. And it's not perfect. It's not as good as Rocky 3, but the storylines are pretty damn good. You understand them. You understand what Apollo Creed, being out of the game for a few years, still kind of, silently jealous of what Rocky's become, sees an opening, sees an opportunity to get back in there in a fight he thinks will be easy, that'll sort of just, rev his own engine up one more time. And, the thing that I loved ultimately, that this I say comedic, Rocky's not a comedy, but there's some levels of these Rocky movies, particularly 4, that are just over the top. It's almost comedic, but yet they handle a real thing, death in the ring, and they handle at other times in the series, the early onset of CTE and all that. And I think it's, it's important and it's legitimate. And I mean, are there better scenes than the opening of the Creed Drago fight with James Brown and all that fanfare and ridiculousness living in America? Are there better scenes than the dueling workout montages of Drago with the steroids and the full crack team of the Soviet government, and Rocky just doing it old school? Or the tear jerking moments when Adrian finally gives in and shows up in Moscow, or Rocky climbing that 13,000 foot mountain that was actually filmed in the Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, but you're supposed to think that's like Siberia, and, with the jacket and the hat on and the boots and yelling Drago. I mean, call me what you want. Call me an absolute cheeseball. That's top shelf entertainment right there. There's no more film in this series more rewatchable than Rocky 4. It is, and it's like, the most ridiculous, from an actual boxing sense, the most ridiculous fight in this entire 9 movies of an actual sanctioned boxing match, when comparing it to actual boxing, is probably Balboa versus Drago. Yet it just works because it's the 80s dialed up to about 12, right? I mean, it is just sweat, blood. I mean, they broke every boxing rule, hitting guys when they're down, throwing the, power slamming them, knocking them into the ropes and then knocking them out when they bounce off. I mean, there's some great moments in there, but Rocky 4 rules. And, and I'll go to the grave telling you why, if you're willing to let me. Top 3 time. Let's transition here. 2015. Forgot how freaking good this movie is. The first Creed is my 3rd best in the Rocky and Creed series. And Ryan Coogler is huge in this. Director, co-writer, along with Aaron Covington. You needed Stallone on board, and they had him. And he did very well as the aging mentor trainer who he was a little bit more willing in Rocky 5 to take on that role storyline wise for Tommy Gunn. Even and again, some parts of the Rocky 5 story could have worked, like Rocky's own son, watching him give everything to Tommy Gunn, give him the cufflinks that Rocky Marciano that Mick gave him, do all that, as the son's like, that should be me. That should have worked. The acting sucked, but it should have worked. It works here in Creed 1 with Rocky as the, still the restaurant owner, but he doesn't want to train anybody. He doesn't want to get into this game. But, Adonis Creed's life changes dramatically, Donnie Johnson there, when he gets out of juvenile hall and gets a new life there in Hollywood in the mansion. And that couldn't have been easy character wise, storyline wise, for Miss Mama Creed to have done that. But it worked, and it was such a refresh on the series, and it carried just enough of the fan service, identifiable themes of what made this story great, and just enough of like the old Bill Conti songs from the great, right? I mean, what's better than the scores of these early Rocky movies? They updated those just enough. And by the way, underrated part about Rocky 5. Soundtrack's pretty cool, because the soundtrack was entirely taking the songs from Rocky 1, 2, and 3 and kind of like spinning them in a modern, almost hip hop way. Actually, that part actually worked. They did that even better this time in Creed 1. But ultimately, what makes it great is it's like, what's happening. What is going to happen. That things are playing out almost in a Rocky 1 like way, but for Adonis Creed. But yet you're never like, oh, this is just a reproduction, because it was made with so much heart and passion. And I think that's the difference that was lacking in Creed 2. It was very formulaic, certainly lacking to me in some degrees in Rocky 2 and in Rocky 5 and some of these other lower moments of the series. It was right dialed in here. You had a fresh director, a fresh way of looking at it, a great young actor in Michael B. Jordan, who, everything he's touched, from The Wire to Friday Night Lights to, Black Panther to whatever other awesome action movie he was in that I didn't see that you probably love. I mean, has he ever touched anything and not been great with it? No. He's great in this role. He gets it, right? He really gets how to move. He played such a huge role in moving this franchise forward. And I thought that the way that they presented boxing was great. You had a heavy, for that time period, heavy HBO presence of, Jim Lampley and Max Kellerman. And by the way, I mentioned Al Bernstein in Creed 3, also in Creed 5, and it's in Rocky 5. Love that connection. Let's not forget Stu Nahan, the late sportscaster. I think he was out in LA, who was in the first 6 Rocky movies, by the way, the first 6 as either the announcer or the local media member. But they didn't waste too much time in Creed 1 bringing back the past. I mean, look, Adrian's character was dead, even though she was still alive. Almost everybody else, was dead anyway. But I think Rocky played the perfect supporting role while the film was still about this kid, Creed. And of course, you've got the connections of Apollo Creed and the wife, and you've got all that, but it took it forward. And when you have the real life boxing presentation of him fighting real fighters like Pretty Ricky Conlon as Tony Bellew, and you've got, Gabriel Rosado playing the son of the trainer who took over Mighty Mick's old gym, and love it. I watched it once on a plane right when it came out, liked it a lot. Didn't realize until I watched it with my kids that it's arguably, I don't want to say it's arguably the best, but I mean, it's in that conversation. It really is. And I didn't think, because of my love and ties to the past and how that overtakes sometimes what the new stuff can bring when you're so stuck in nostalgia like I am, I didn't realize that really giving Creed 1 the time was going to make me realize that across the board, this is a great watch, and it just works, and it's gritty, and it's fantastic. It's exciting. And, does it ever equal truly those Rocky 1 or 3 or whatever sort of chill bump moments? No, I don't know, but it comes pretty damn close, and it's got everything else going for it. Let's go down to number 2. I think you know how this might play out the rest of the way, but it's important to walk through it. Rocky 3 is a phenomenal movie. It's arguably the best. I've been telling you guys for weeks on Morning Kombat, if you've been watching, that on this rewatch tour, it just stands out to me so much. My personal connection, like I said, to clip this off. I mean, Rocky 3 spawned so many loves for me early in my life that I still love today. But I still really think the movie holds up great. I could make an argument here why it's actually the best one. Maybe you didn't grow up with this like I did. Maybe you watch it after the fact 20 years later and you're like, it's okay. For the times, because Rocky 2 was a good but ultimately diminishing results version of Rocky 1, right? Rocky 3 was injection. It was revival. It was Rocky, no more down on his luck, no more of that. It's how are you dealing with being the actual champion, and you're making all this money, and now you're trying to figure out in your mid-30s, like, how long do I hang on? And he's trying to retire, but this new super villain arrives on the scene in Clubber Lang, the what do they call himself in the film? Like the South Side Brawler. I mean, my kids asked me, Dad, what's your favorite character in the whole film? Clubber Lang. Yeah, pity the fool. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, my prediction is pain. I mean, are you kidding me? Miss Balboa. Well, I know you dream about being with a real man. I mean, there's just some of these most epic moments ever. But the MVP of Rocky 3 is Burgess Meredith. It's Mickey. And, his character dies in it. But those scenes of sitting Rocky down and saying, look, you got to walk away from the game, because unbeknownst to you as your manager, I've been lining you up with tin cans left and right to preserve you. And, that revelation, it broke Rocky's heart. It led him to wanting to come back in a lot of ways for all the wrong reasons. And then he really had to navigate losing his title on the same night he lost his manager and mentor and, and North Star in a lot of ways. And, and it is cool, by the way, that how much in Creed 1, Rocky is still echoing the lessons taught to him by Mick in a new, fresh way to, I mean, it's weird. Even though there's no mention really of Stallone or Balboa there in the third Creed movie, there's a couple little moments, right, where Adonis Creed is warming up in the locker room before fighting Dame, where he's reciting in his head one step, one punch, all that stuff. It's all brilliant synergy, and it goes back to how just indispensable in this series. So I say, look, who's the true MVP of the entire series? It's Sylvester Stallone / Rocky Balboa. Paulie Burt Young is so huge as that supporting actor along the way. You could argue Michael B. Jordan has done so much on a personal level, directing and starring to inject new life in it. But Burgess Meredith brought the best acting chops to what we've seen here across the board. And he's great in this film. And then you have the rebirth of Balboa's character through joining forces with his old rival in Apollo Creed and going to the bare bones training style in LA, right? I mean, it's so good. The ending fight is so good. The first fight he loses is so good. Those early montages of Clubber Lang knocking people the freak out, so good. The music, so good. And I think you can argue this between Rocky 3 or 4. What's the coolest Balboa ever was as a character, Stallone, in these movies? It's 3 and 4, and it's 3. It is. You got Hulk Hogan, you got Mr. T, and it works. Even the corny pro wrestling scene there with Hulk Hogan is still kind of holds up to some degree and fits into the storyline. I really encourage you, if you're not on this with me, if your top 5 looks a lot different, somehow Rocky 3 is somewhere in the middle, rewatch it. I think you might be surprised there, not to steal some Schaub lines from you. Number 1, you knew it was coming and it was a slam dunk. It's Rocky 1. I don't think we even realized how unlikely this actually was. John Avildsen, who was almost nobody at that point, he hadn't done the Karate Kids, he hadn't done anything. He's this director, and you got Stallone, who's got this great script. And he'll try to argue that it wasn't based on Chuck Wepner. I think he would argue that a lot, so that when he got sued, he didn't have to pay as much. But it was the idea of this movie was, sort of sprung on the idea of Stallone watching Chuck Wepner, the Bayonne Bleeder, go in there as a huge underdog against heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali and step on Ali's foot and drop him late and have this moment. And even though he got beat up and bloodied and ultimately lost, and that sparked this idea of the ultimate underdog. And it still holds up storyline wise in ways that I never imagined. So I've seen this, a million times, right? I mean, I've seen Rocky 3 and 4 more than any in the series by far, but I've seen 1 a lot as a kid. But I really hadn't seen it in 20 good years. Watching it with my kids, and it's like I was asking myself as the movie started, would I buy into, would this still hold up to inspire me, like truly inspire me? Like, people exited the theaters like ready to turn their life around. This had such a 1976 level impact on people. I had tears in my eyes at the end of this film in ways I just never imagined. I mean, it's slow, yes, but when you frame it, like my kids won't understand why it's slow and why that's so good. But when you frame it under the guise of what were popular 1970s movies of that time in ilk, and a reminder, I got to look it up. The films that this film ultimately beat out for Best Picture in 1976. I mean, it's ridiculous. Rocky wins against All the President's Men, Bound for Glory, Network, which is, when I go back and relive these great 70s movies, just blows me away how great and ahead of the time that was. And Taxi Driver, yet Rocky wins. So back to the point I'm saying about like the times, what were the best films of the times in the mid to late 70s, which is such an incredible time for cinema. And I love rewatching these. It's these dark neo-noir films. Now, Rocky 1 isn't dark on the level of Taxi Driver or all of these Pacino hits and even The Godfather, which isn't necessarily, you don't look at that as a dark movie, but has some of these elements of it. I mean, these are just there's so many great ones, right? Like The Gambler with James Caan. I mean, there's so many, and they're gritty and grimy and dark. This is all of that, Rocky, yet with that unprecedented inspirational feel. And I say unprecedented, it's not like there haven't been inspirational movies before, but there's just something so pure and everyman and identifiable about Balboa's character. And still, it's only because, like Stallone didn't have the experience to know what to do and what not to do. And he made this character ridiculous and goofy and, tells bad jokes and sings bad songs. I mean, kind of like me hosting Morning Kombat for the most part. And I mean, there's some corny ass moments in here that are so iconic. Like when when he's yelling Adrian after the fight ends and his eyes are closed and he can't see, and she comes rushing into the ring after having her bandana knocked off, and he doesn't say, I love you, or I did it, or I almost did it, or we should get married, or anything. He goes, where's your hat? I mean, like that was actually a written in moment and a key point in this movie that for a film that won Best Picture. It's insane. And it works because it's Stallone pouring his heart into it. And yes, you needed Burt Young, Burgess Meredith, Talia Shire. You needed these great and celebrated actors along with him. Carl Weathers as Apollo Creed. You needed all of that. But you needed Stallone to ultimately have the control that he had. Now, he didn't direct this, as I said, but he wrote it and he starred in it and he did a power play to do that. And nobody else could have played this character. And nobody else could have played this character as real, because there's no doubt Stallone's pouring in elements of his own life and struggle to try to make it in that moment. I mean, I'm 44 years old and I'm 20 years removed from watching this, and I'm sitting there trying to cover my gushing tears when they go to the final bell there in round 15, and the fact that he didn't win the fight is so 1970s. It's great. This movie was as dark as all of those neo-noirs and as spread out and as gritty and just made you feel it, yet had the ultimate inspirational underdog thing. And oh, by the way, he lost at the end, but obviously won in life because he proved everything, not to everyone else, not to his girl, to himself. It's a message that still matters. Yeah, it's some, great white hope boxer who had 20 losses and lucked into this fight in storyline purposes because, Creed's other opponent got hurt and they didn't have anybody else and all that stuff. But it just works, and it still works. So yeah, if I'm going to ask myself what truly is the greatest film over 9 Rocky and Creed, films in this entire story arc and lineage, it's still the best film, and it still holds up, and it's still freaking amazing. I mean, there's elements of that are dated for its time for sure, but not dated enough to lose the impact in the moment of what those are. I mean, when Rocky's a heavy for the local mafia, doing loan shark knee breaking and the drivers making fun. I mean, there's just so many great little moments that just felt like that time. I wasn't alive in 1976. I was born 2 years later, but I have such a romanticized nostalgic picture of what the early 80s, which, think about it, the 80s didn't really become the 80s until 1984, and I'll go to my grave saying that. Like, on a cultural entertainment crossover level, it was like, the first couple of years of the 80s were the hangover of the 70s and the recession and everything that was going on there. And it was dark and grimy, and all the films represented that. I mean, look at New York City in the late 70s, right? I mean, it just represented that. It's great. It's a great movie, and it holds up, and it's number one. Disagree, agree with what I said, my facts are wrong, whatever, give me some comments, reach out to me. morningcombat@gmail.com, of course, is our email address if you want to go even deeper. But I had fun. I poured a lot of heart into this. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you identified with some of this along the way. You could take it a little bit different. I see some people, putting Creed 1 as the second best after Rocky 1, putting Creed 3 pretty high up there, putting Rocky Balboa high up there. Just don't want people to sleep on and miss what 3 and 4 were trying to do. Stallone saved the franchise. He resurrected it, and he leaned into the times like he did in Rocky 1, right? Leaned into the times of the 80s. Maybe it's a good thing that series kind of went away in the 90s, right? But when it came back in 06, it's still dug deep and hit you with one, right? It's still slipped in one of those punches. And where it is now and where it's going, I think they got over the sophomore slump of Creed 2. And I think they're on their way. I mean, look, do I want, Adonis Creed's daughter, to, be a fighter in the next one and have this be the equivalent of like Hilary Swank and Karate Kid, the part 4 that we never talk about? No, but I don't think it'll be that bad. I think, eventually I think there's, you probably got another movie with Creed as like an active fighter trying to find one more fight. You'd love to see Stallone work back in and resurface, but I think the future is bright there. This was Morning Combat. My name is and was and will be Brian Campbell. So thank you for liking, subscribing, and checking in with me on this day. That's all I got. Okay. Yo, Adrian, we just did it. We actually just did it, and it's over. And by the way, How good in Creed 3 is Adonis Creed climbing the mountain like Rocky and Rocky 4, only it's right behind the Hollywood sign in LA. Dude, they made as much as, let me close on this. As much as Rocky 1, 2, parts of 3, and 5, and 6, Rocky Balboa, made Philadelphia, the city, almost a main character, like, almost a central figure. Creed did that with LA quietly the last few times, right? I mean, Creed 1, they spent a lot of time in Philly, right? But particularly here, Creed 3, like they made LA a character in this, and I enjoyed it, and I love it. I mean, LA is the best city in the world. All right, it's my favorite city in the world. It's not the best. All right, there you go. Rocky 1, it's the best. Rocky 3, that's my favorite. But I'm BC and I ramble for a living. This has been Campbell's Rambles, and I am out.